speaking about amendments? All right. Amendment number 1, council members Parker and Welsh. Are you planning to offer that amendment? Okay, council member Parker.
If you would, Chair, is this the amendment regarding the heavy equipment or the amendment regarding the heavy equipment? Thank you. I would like to offer this amendment this evening. This has turned into this discussion around this resolution does appear to have become something of an inflection point about our approach to homelessness and how we deal with it. My chief concern when I saw this is, if we're equipping departments with equipment that could be used for demolition of homeless encampments, I'm afraid that that's going to become the default tool that we're going to say, okay, well, we have the equipment, and even if one particular department is not the spear's tip in any given case, I feel like we are arming parks with equipment that would end up being utilized in service of breaking up homeless encampments, and it's just not something that I think we should be doing. It's not the correct approach to homelessness. So what this amendment does is it removes the appropriations to acquire heavy equipment, bobcat excavators, bright lights that could be utilized to prevent a tent from being comfortable to sleep in. And so I think, if I'm okay with some of the money moving forward for Brookmead, that's fantastic. But this equipment in particular, I cannot support. So I would ask my colleagues to join me in voting to remove the heavy equipment from this request.
Thank you. And since these amendments somewhat overlap, I think probably it's helpful to discuss all 3 amendments before we begin voting. If there's no objection to that approach, I'm not sure that they are compatible with each other, and I'm not sure that we want to vote on the first one before we've gotten to others. Councilmember Mendez, and then I'll recognize Hannah for.
I think they're completely compatible. There's 3 components to the legislation. Each amendment hits a different one of the 3 components.
Okay, Councilman.
And I think they were set up as 3 separate amendments to address the 3 separate parts.
Okay. Is that
correct?
I'll go ahead and move Amendment 1 because Mr. Parker's not a member of the committee.
Moved and seconded. Ms. Eitland.
These amendments are compatible with each other. I'd say you probably don't want to add all 3 because that would bring the appropriation to 0. But they do all work together. Also, I'll kind of mention these really should be substitutes, but I think that for the sake of discussion, they work a little bit better as amendments, even though they're amending the caption of the bill. But just so that the substitutes don't kick each other out, these are formatted as amendments.
Thank you for that.
And we'll do a true-up substitute if that works for the committee.
Depending on what we end up
Correct.
with. Okay, fair enough. All right, based on, I think, information that may be relevant then to cameras, I'll wait on the request from Commander Corman. Okay, so what we have before us is an amendment that simply removes heavy equipment, and I see a hand raised by Councilmember Sledge. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of questions of the administration on this one. So on the line, there's line items for what we're referring to colloquially as bobcats. And in some of the coverage of Brookmead in particular, there's been photography taken that shows bobcats being used for cleanup from some of the items there. So I'm trying to determine, we're asking for bobcats under parks for this, but whose bobcats were those?
Let's see, administration, can you answer that question?
I think we have representatives from the Parks Department, Miss Odom here, and I'll defer to her first and then join.
Ms. Odom, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. So the bobcats and the equipment that is requested here, I just want to clarify that this equipment is not being requested to disrupt a current homeless encampment. This is for once the homeless encampment is abandoned. So we would not go in, Parks will not go in and, for lack of a better term, bulldoze folks out. Over the past probably 10 years, our protocol has been to work and coordinate with the Homeless Impact Division and not to criminalize homelessness. But to your question, Councilman Sledge, we do have a couple of heavy equipment pieces, bobcats for the entire park system. This would add to them. If we did not have these, when we need to use them, we either rent them through a vendor, work with a peer metro department to borrow what equipment they have, or use what we already have.
So to that end, I guess my question would be, Director, when you use these, what other purposes do you use those bobcats for there in the Parks Department?
So for high forested areas, if there is invasive plant material, I mean, they can be used for a number of purposes, and they would be. These wouldn't solely be focused for disruption of a homeless encampment. I do not want to give that depiction at all.
So feasibly, if we were to fund these bobcats, this even though this is in a homelessness impact legislation, it's very feasible these bobcats would be used for things other than clearing debris from previous homeless encampments. I think you're trying to say.
They absolutely would be in terms of stewardship of resources. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Director. Colleagues, I think that's my whole problem with this piece, with this legislation, and we'll get to the other pieces as well. Is that there's been proposed equipment that, if used for common parks purposes, I don't think any of us would find particularly problematic or have questions about. I'd look at things like power washers and think, yeah, it probably makes sense to have power washers for parks maintenance. But the fact of the matter is that this equipment was put in on a request about homelessness. And to me, that strikes me as saying, that's how it's going to be used. So if you put in a request later on, I mean, in the Treasury guidelines for the ARP, it speaks specifically about parks and green spaces, particularly for underserved communities. And I think if the ARP committee wanted to come back and say, we have a package of parks-related materials where we want to help health outcomes in underserved communities, and as part of that, we need to make sure that we're maintaining our parks, I think that's worthy of consideration of this body. I do not think that it's worthy of consideration of this body in the context of homelessness. And for that reason, I'll be asking the committee to support the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Other comments on this? Councilmember Johnston.
I'm going to let Council Lady Gamble speak first, and then I'll speak afterwards.
Okay,
if that's
thank you.
okay.
Sure, and then Councilmember Roten after that. Gamble.
Thank you, Chair Allen and Councilmember Johnston. I just wanted to speak in support of or speak against rather this amendment, because I understand what Councilmember Sledge is mentioning about how it looks like this particular request is specific to homelessness, but it had to be included in this in this resolution, because if it had not, and then the equipment had been used to remove debris from abandoned camps or even just around the park, for myself, there is a homeless, a large encampment in my district that we've worked with social services with to maintain for several years, but even that has a need to have large items such as shopping carts and things removed to keep the environment safe, as well as to keep the environment clean. So it's an environmental hazard to have a lot of debris and things in an area that is not being used and needs to be cleaned up. So while I understand the idea that this equipment is being asked to address or keep our parks clean or to remove debris from uninhabited encampments, it is also being used. It will also be used for other factors, but we had to include this use in the resolution to make it clear to everyone that it would be used for that as well. So for those reasons, I think the park director has made it clear to our COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee, and also made it clear here today that the intention is not for parks to address homelessness. That's not the intention of this resolution. We have another resolution where we allocated funding to the Homeless Impact Division to address homelessness and getting support for unhoused individuals. This resolution addresses management of parks, keeping our parks clean and safe for everyone. It is not to address homelessness, removing homeless camps or anything like that. It is to manage our parks system. So for those reasons, I don't believe that this amendment would help in that regard of managing parks, and I don't think it would help in the regard of helping our homeless population. So for those reasons, I ask that you do not approve this amendment and move forward with the resolution as stated.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you for recognizing me, even though I'm not on the committee, but I am on the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee. So when we had Director Odom come and talk to us, we actually spent quite a bit of time asking questions and talking about this resolution. I don't think it's a secret that our Parks Department is grossly underfunded and has been for a long time. From a people perspective, from an equipment perspective, we have over 16,000 acres of parks, and they're struggling to keep up with maintaining that. We added to their operating budget with our substitute to help hire extra people because they need that help. This is another way to help that. These ARP funds are a gift to the city, and Parks needs this equipment. I don't know how to Councilman Sledge's point of somehow this has turned into Parks is going to deal with homelessness with bobcats and lights, and we're just going to go. That's not the case at all. In fact, the $850,000 for the actual Brookmead Park renovation, that renovation's not even going to happen, because I talked to Director Odom. I thought, why would we go through and spend all this money to renovate the park when we haven't solved the problem? We need to help these folks find permanent housing. You know, that doesn't make any sense. And she said, absolutely, no. Their job is not to deal with the homelessness issue. And that's not what this equipment is for. That's not what these cameras are for. The cameras are for security, and I know I'm getting into another amendment, but they sort of all go together. This equipment is needed for maintenance throughout the county in all of our parks and greenways. It's not addressing homelessness at all.
Thank you. I've got several people in the queue, Rosenberg, Mendez, and then Sledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know a lot of folks have a lot of legitimate questions about the wisdom of some of the spending. I wanted to let you know that even though it hasn't been disseminated yet, I filed this morning a late filed amendment that simply says that no money allocated under this resolution shall have the purpose or effect of removing residents from homeless encampments, and hope that that can have some impact on the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And that would be a late filed amendment to this bill. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Let's see. And I had said, Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. Just briefly, to the point a couple council members made about it's a gift to help parks, and it's not about homelessness. I mean, literally the caption says a resolution appropriating $1.9 million in American Recovery Plan Act funds to Metro Parks to be used for managing homeless encampments. I mean, that is the stated purpose of this spending. And so I mean, I don't know how we get in a debate of now the argument is, it's not really, I mean, literally the argument's been made now a couple different times this afternoon that this is not about managing homelessness encampments or managing homelessness, but that is the express purpose of the spending. And so I stand with the points that Councilman Sledge has made.
Thank you. Councilmember Sledge and then Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on those comments, again, and I will look to Ms. Wiggins or whoever to tell me if I'm mistaken on this, but Treasury guidelines on ARP funds specifically address parks maintenance and specifically say there's a host of uses that can be that can be qualified, that are qualified expenditures for parks, and specifically in the Treasury guidelines, parks maintenance. The problem I have with the way this is being presented is the committee, which I appreciate their work and appreciate all the thought that they're putting into this, but the committee presented this proposal in the context of homelessness. And we know that because it says it in the caption, as Councilmember Mendez says, it says it on the header of the line items that it's about homelessness, and it came to us in the same package of legislation, the rest of which we passed, which addressed homelessness. That is the context in which this is used. And while I do appreciate Councilmember Rosenberg's late-filed amendment, I think we all know we don't know if late-filed amendments succeed in this body anymore. And the fact of the matter is, who's to say whether lighting set up at a park is used for security or is used to impact somebody who might be sleeping there? It could easily be said one way or the other. It could easily be said for a lot of this other equipment. What I would request of the committee, of the ARP committee, is when they get to, and I surely hope they get to, parks funding and parks maintenance, because it is desperately needed, as Councilmember Johnson mentioned, that the conversation is holistic regarding parks maintenance and that we get a resolution addressing spending regarding parks. This resolution doesn't do that. This resolution is about homelessness, and that's why I'm asking committee members to recommend approval of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on this committee. I am a part of the ARP committee. I didn't vote for this legislation, and I differ a little bit from my colleagues. This legislation was presented on a day where the specific subject was homelessness and how we address that. So I do agree with my colleagues on that front. I do have a problem when we already have a lot of these machines already in our parks department, and we're adding more. And I said this at the last meeting, I'm getting at a very uncomfortable state where we're starting to make capital improvements, and we haven't had proper discussion with the community as a whole. We're in the process right now of creating a platform on Hub Nashville where the community could give us input as to what their priorities are. We have a draft guide, and I've said this before, but we wanted to put that forward in front of the community so they could tell us where they want to spend money and where they don't. And the Bobcats and some of the equipment start falling into that category for me. We said that we would discuss emergency needs, and then there's capital improvements and ways of addressing other subject matters. I don't know if there is a way, maybe, because I do agree that Parks doesn't receive enough funding, and we need more green space and more staff to try and help with the maintenance and of some of these parks. But I don't know if there's a way for Parks to agree to, and tell council, hey, let's put this specific item off. Let's come back when Parks comes before us again, if they come before us again, to discuss Parks funding as a whole, or maybe putting Bobcats in some other department where other departments have access to that equipment. But like I said, I'm a part of the ARP committee, and it just falls into that category of capital improvements.
Thank you. Ms. Wiggins, since your name was mentioned, can you speak again to the criteria that the ARP funds are subject to, as opposed to other buckets that we've gotten?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really what Councilmember Sledge indicated is accurate, that there are several different areas that are sometimes generally explained, and sometimes they give a specific example. And having more open space and parks that are properly maintained for people to be outside, which was deemed safer than being inside during COVID, was an eligible expense. So equipment and some of the other needs to create more open green space that is safe for the public to use would be an eligible use of the funds. Likewise, as presented for addressing unhoused, it is also eligible. So you have the same equipment that would be eligible under two different descriptions within the American Rescue Plan. They would both be eligible for the same equipment.
Thank you. And then administratively, Ms. Zeitlin, if you can, if we, or to both of you, if we take this money out of this, then it goes back to the committee to decide how else to use it, and one possibility would be to reframe it in a new bill that addresses parks as opposed to other things. Is that possible? I think your mic is still on, Ms. Wiggins' end.
Yes, that's completely possible. I mean, the committee, we give all the feedback from the council to the committee. We have departments that have made, initial requests, but it's not their full request. So we expect departments to be coming back. Remember that we've really been looking at the first allotment, which was roughly $130 million. That we'll receive the second allotment next year, and we have the funds for appropriation until 12/31/24. So these will be ongoing allocations.
Thank you. And then can you just address procedurally?
And so, right, if it's reduced out of this resolution, I think that it would basically fall back to the COVID-19 committee's pool of money instead of, if it were allocated and then not allocated through the resolution and then not spent. I think that would be a little bit of a different process.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions on this amendment in particular? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor of Amendment 1, which removes money for heavy equipment, indicate by saying aye. I think I need a show of hands on this one. Raise your hands in favor of the amendment. Okay, so I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. All those opposed? 1, 2. That is 6 out of 9. Is that 3 people not voting?
Not voting, raise your hand.
If not voting, raise your hand. Okay, so do we need a simple majority or just? Okay, so yeah. Amendment is recommended 4 in favor, 2 against. All right, next is Amendment 2. Sponsors Sledge, Mendez, Welsh, Porterfield, O'Connell, Sepulveda. Who would like to speak on this one? Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I brought this amendment forward because I felt like there seemed to be sentiment coalescing, and I think the co-sponsor list at least somewhat indicates that sentiment suggesting that of the proposed funding here, this seemed the most questionable, or at least had the most questions around it. This body has taken on the issue of
Councilmember Sledge, just for the viewing audience, can you briefly describe what this one does and how much money?
I'll tell you what I'll do first. I'll move it first so that we can discuss it.
Okay.
Okay, and then to describe it,
Thank you.
It removes, I believe, Hannah, $480,000 that would be used to fund what are termed in the bill as eye-in-the-sky cameras, which are about 125 cameras placed around our park system. So in the previous committee discussion that we had about this, we did talk with Director Odom, who was kind enough to answer some of our questions, and we talked with the administration. But I came away feeling like there were more questions than answers, quite honestly, on how the camera system was used, how the data was stored, who had access to it, did they have access to it in real time, how, if at all, are these cameras publicly accessible, or if data collected by these cameras are publicly accessible. And, this body has, over the years, taken privacy and surveillance really seriously, and I'm proud of us for doing that. We had rigorous discussions in public and on this floor about body cameras and how we, for the police department, and how those were to be implemented and how those were to be used. We are in the midst of another conversation regarding license plate readers and how that data could be used and stored. And to me, this conversation here falls in that bucket of what do we find acceptable? What do we find is helpful and useful? And again, I'll go back to my comments about the context from the previous amendment. it is placed in the context of homelessness response. And so we have placed in this bill an extensive camera network that we are told to vote for, so it is a homelessness response. And I want to speak personally about what occurred in the district I represent, because the tours that were set up, this one was then further described as, to go see what the effectiveness of the cameras were. And I'll tell you, I had a resident who attended that meeting and was told that the cameras were the reasons that the incidents that were occurring with homeless Nashvillians at Osfron Park decreased. And she accurately responded that the cameras were not the reason. The reason was there were services provided at the park in the form of electrical outlets and a water park and, quite frankly, places where people could sleep or hide, and picnic tables. There was, frankly, a community center set up for that park. When those items were removed to the detriment of everyone, and I had this conversation with leadership at Conexión Americas, residents who are being affected by this, with Metro Parks, with Metro Social Services, with Metro Police, and we came to the conclusion that, unfortunately, the way that we were going to have to address this issue in the short term was removing amenities from a park. That is terrible. That is awful to think through, that I had to think about that as a council member, to say, I need to take away amenities from my community because of an issue that we're having. And instead of spending time on saying, how do we address this issue at its core, we're having this discussion. We're having a discussion about how can we better monitor, how can we better surveil. Cameras didn't have anything to do with that. And so I highly question the effectiveness of what's being proposed here based on my own lived experience, my own experience as a council member. And that's why I think, again, more questions and answers placed in a context I find highly inappropriate. And I would ask committee members to remove this as well and vote for this amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I would, Councilmember Hauser, I recognize you, and then I would like to ask someone from MNPD to speak to their experience with cameras. Let's see, Councilmember Hauser.
I'm going to ask them to speak as well, because I first wanted to thank very much for the Midtown, Central, and West Precincts for the work that your community outreach people are doing in the parks. These are the folks that every day are in the parks. They know everybody's name. They know everybody's story. They know what they need, and they do tremendous work. And then I do want them to speak in a moment. I wanted to say that when I was in the parks, one of the things that we heard from the people who live in the parks is they wanted cameras. Just like we have a Ring doorbell on your front door. Hopefully when that Amazon package is delivered, it's still there when you get home, because the person sees they're going to get their picture taken on the Ring doorbell. What we were told from the residents is they wanted cameras. So we need to kind of think about this from a safety perspective of the people that are in the parks as well as the people who are visiting the parks. And I would appreciate if, I don't know if Jay Cervais, you're still here? Yeah, if you would speak, or any of the other fellows you brought with, for what you were seeing. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll let the folks back there decide who of you wants to come address the question about cameras, but. And if you'll give your name and your role, that would be helpful to us.
Good evening. My name is David Corman. I'm the commander at West Precinct, and Brookmead Park is in our precinct. And as it relates to the cameras, I had a presentation here to give you some oversight of what it looks like, but I'm going to just talk to the points as it pertains to public safety. Cameras help create a force multiplier for the police. I'll talk about some of the violent crime that's occurring around the park. The reported aggravated assaults are likely just a portion of the actual number of events that are occurring. Often, the residents of a homeless encampment don't report some of these crimes. The fear of retaliation from those that they live with inside the parks. Self-resolution, meaning they like to try to resolve the problems themselves because, yet again, they're afraid of some form of retaliation they may succumb to within other individuals that live there. Sometimes they don't have a means to report it. If they do have a cell phone, it's based off of Wi-Fi, and there's any Wi-Fi out there, they don't have cellular service, so they can't call the police immediately. And, unfortunately, not all of the homeless trust the police. It's an endeavor that we are continually working on. Cameras can help prevent crime. The mere fact that a camera is placed in an open space that gives perception that the area could be safer. Our community coordinators work with local businesses and private residents that they talk about how they can make their businesses and their homes safer. Oftentimes it's used with cameras. When cameras are visible in plain sight, sometimes it is almost like what we used to say back in older days when there weren't cameras: turn your lights on, keep crime away, keep those that want to do harm away, for fear they would be caught. Also, crime resolution. Often audio and video footage is captured and used later to solve a crime. Valuable evidence can be obtained regarding suspect description, vehicle description, in some cases actually capture a crime that occurred inside. So we did actually have one of our mobile trailers out there that recorded an aggravated assault with two individuals that reside in the park. So we were able to identify that person and get a warrant and take that violent person outside the park. Like I said before, it's a force multiplier. This is not a new concept. There are cameras inside parks. We would not be using as active surveillance. And to talk about some of the special events that occur on the downtown parks, oftentimes are there, that would supplement our ability to have better security down there. It helps us with missing persons response and also suicidal and health response. I noticed that in speaking to Sergeant Kinney from the Central Precinct and Commander Starling, Central Precinct, there's a large number of their population that actually say the same things that Council Hauser said. They would support cameras being in there. They feel safer. They know crime will be reduced. They feel that the crime could be resolved. That's not readily apparent to Officer Cantrell, who is one of the quality of life officers at West Precinct. We do know of one individual that won't sleep inside the park on some nights because she feels it's too dangerous. And we know this because we get calls about someone sleeping at a local Exxon or another business. And when the police go there and talk to her, she says that I feel safer here because there's a camera. I know if something happens to me, it'll be captured. So those are some of the things that we think are very beneficial. I know there's a lot of mistrust or lack of trust surrounding surveillance and cameras. But I would say that the cameras aren't really the problem. It's the policy and the oversight that we must, as a government body, have in place so that they're not abused, and that the good things that come out of the cameras could be used to make communities safer, whether it be a park or a neighborhood. Does it have any questions for me or Officer Cantrell or Sergeant Kinney?
Can you speak to who has access to the information on the cameras and how long it's retained?
I don't know the specifics about how long it's retained. I believe that the camera systems are on the platform we use is called Milestone. I don't know what the retention is, but you have to be a user that's approved through Metro IT to have access to it.
Okay.
My experience.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Sledge.
To that end, regarding the policy, is what's collected. I know you don't know how long it's maintained, but is it open to public records requests?
I would imagine it. I would imagine it is.
Okay. And you said it's not actively monitored, but is it accessible? Let's say you get a report that something's happening in a park. Are you able to immediately access that camera?
Well, let me clarify, sir. We, the police, aren't sitting there watching the cameras. We actively, when we get a crime that comes across, we are searching for some sort of video data. Well, if it happens in a certain area, in downtown or another area of a park or somewhere we know there's cameras, we will search those. But oftentimes we have an offense report of a crime and we know that it happened at a certain date in a window of time, and that's when we'll look for it. We don't sit there and scour the data.
Sure, understood. I guess what I'm saying is, do you have the ability to access it real time? Let's say you have an interest.
Yes.
You do. Okay. And I guess my other question, since it was brought up, this IT policy of the administration is, how is it determined who has access from IT's perspective?
And that may require someone from IT to answer, but let's see, we can find out. Let's see, anyone from administration able to answer that question?
It would require the IT department to weigh in. I would underscore a couple of things. This is a proposal that was advanced by the Metro Parks Department and then submitted through the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee. But our reception to it was favorable, including the deployment of cameras. Cameras have been in Metro Parks for at least over 20 years. They're currently in 48 parks. If you were to ask Director Odom what has been the reception to the public by those cameras, there has not been a single complaint against their presence in terms of being obtrusive or surveying too much. Councilman Sledge, I had a delightful conversation with the constituent that you referenced that was with us at Azafran Park. You were correct about her discussion about how other services were shut down. What I recall from that conversation specifically was that she wanted the cameras and she wanted more of them. She seemed a little disappointed, but there was no live monitoring, and there's not. This is a reactive approach by the police department. When there's an incident, can they then go find the suspect? And in several instances, and as you heard Commander Corman describe, the cameras are being used defensively for the homeless community, not offensively. But the most recent experience that he shared with you just this past summer, the lady in Brookmead Park that was viciously assaulted, the assailant was captured only because of the presence of cameras in that episode. But again, no complaints by the public against these, and the council took up the notion of surveillance, not with LPRs. The council, we understand, is divided on license plate readers, and that has been a debate going on for a year. But last term, there was an extensive ordinance enacted by this body regarding the role of cameras in the public right-of-way, and this body specifically created and fashioned an approach for their use in instances like this in parks departments. As long as it's a current use, as long as the additional cameras don't create more than a 50% increase in the total volume of cameras, deploy them. We have heard Director Odom, we've heard Council Lady Gamble and Councilmember Johnson on their intentions behind the use, not just of the equipment, but of the cameras. And it is not aimed at, it is not offensively aimed at, it is not designed to eliminate the homeless population. And rather than eliminate the funding for a park that is asking for it, we absolutely welcome, if we're in an era of distrust, we absolutely welcome an amendment by you, an amendment by Councilman Rosenberg that I haven't seen yet, any amendment you want that restricts the timing or the allocation of the use with respect to their application to homelessness. But as long as we're allowing Brookmead to seek the improvements that they want, the full caption of the bill doesn't stop at homelessness, but it goes on to speak specifically about renovation and repair of Brookmead. That is the spirit and intent which we heard from the Parks Director and from the Financial Oversight Committee, and we support.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. To be fair, this amendment does not address Brookmead Park other than the cameras that are proposed there. I need to repeat my question because I don't think I heard an answer. What is the IT policy for who has access?
I think the statement there
my
was
first sentence was that we would have to have Metro IT
But we don't know.
respond to that. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll see if we can get someone from IT here. Councilmember Sepulveda, you've patiently held your hand up. You're recognized.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair. Commander, how many crimes have been stopped with the cameras?
Stopped?
Yeah. Do you have data on that?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't say that the cameras have stopped any crime because we don't actively monitor them, but they have helped us. In one of the 2 times that there was an aggravated assault down there when we had that short window of cameras, those particular mobile cameras, we solved 50% of it. We actually saw
So how many
occur.
crimes have been solved because of the cameras?
But there aren't any cameras there except for the 2 times. So
In parks in general, sorry.
don't know about the parks, ma'am. I just know about Brookmead.
Okay,
It's in West Precinct.
thank you.
Mhm.
That was one of the questions we asked as to how many crimes were solved using the cameras. There wasn't any data because it's not tracked specifically. We would have to go into detective notes to try and figure that out. But on another note, I guess we're having a discussion about LPRs, but I think surveillance in general falls under that quite a lot. I also do have a big issue with the cameras. I am one of the 3 council members who's on the Homelessness Planning Council. There were concerns by many of the people who serve on that council and who are part of organizations that help, solve homelessness, and the fact that they weren't reached out to. So we had a meeting not too long ago, and they were very upset. And I don't think that's Director Odom's fault. I think she reached out to social services and talked to social services, but I don't think anyone at social services ever reached out to the Homelessness Planning Council and to those organizations that actually do this work. And at our last meeting, the new interim director that is in place because of Judy left said that there would be more transparency going forward and there would be more communication between the council and social services. So I think there still needs to be more discussion as to what is the best approach to try and help get homeless people housed and help them find jobs and provide them services that they might need, as opposed to this. And I do sympathize with Dr. Odom because I don't think that she ever really intended for our conversation to head this way. I do think that providing more staffing and more green space and other amenities would be more helpful. But I just wanted to let this committee know what the discussion was at the Homelessness Planning Council.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councilmember Glover.
Thank you, Chair. May I address Commander Corman, please?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Commander Corman, let me ask the question a little bit differently, if I may. I realize we're talking about Brookmead, but let's expand that conversation. If you have video of a crime that has occurred, I think you said 50% is what it increases your odds of, I'll say conviction. Maybe that's not the word you used, but did I hear that correctly?
Maybe I didn't explain it correctly. I was trying to answer her question. The 2 crimes that we captured on a temporary camera, one of them we were able to solve. One of them we were not because the camera was not pointed in the right direction.
Okay. And so where I want to go is because you're talking about 2 incidents here. If the police department has cameras that are available and a crime is committed, what are your odds of actually convicting there? Does it not increase drastically because you have that evidence, I'll call it evidence, that allows our police department to do a much more efficient and timely job?
It exponentially increases our ability the probability of solving a crime. Now, of course, there's a lot of factors in play. You have to be able to identify the person, vehicle, some other identifying factor leads you to the suspects. But if no one's there to see it, then unlikely it gets resolved. It definitely increases our probability of solving crimes. Period.
Okay, thank you, Commander. So I think the key thing here is I think it'd be a mistake to remove this particular portion of this because our police department, we talk about the Parks Department's understaffed. There's a lot of departments that are understaffed. Our police department certainly is understaffed. And so if there's a tool that allows them to be much more effective and efficient with a small group of police officers throughout the community, I think that we need to give them every resource we possibly could. So I don't want to remove this piece of it. I'm not certain about the overall resolution here, but on this piece, I firmly support that the police should have that particular tool. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else from the officers in the back want to speak? Yes, sir, you're recognized.
Good evening. I'm Sergeant Brett Kenny. I'm here over the Quality of Life team at Central Precinct. It seems like a lot of us are kind of talking on behalf of what our unhoused neighbors would like in their own communities. Well, so what did we do? We went and asked them. So I've got a complaint number here for anybody who's interested. After the meeting, I will give it to you, and so you can see the whole video of my team with about 30 plus individuals down there asking them about cameras. Okay, so it was 26, I think, people wanted them, 4 were against them. And they'll go into their different reasons of why they are for and against them. And it's their community and their home, just like our neighborhoods. We have cameras, and some of them said, we want cameras too. So I would say, instead of asking me what I heard from them, pull up the video. You can see the conversations with our neighbors over there and why they want them. So I've got that. That's what I wanted to add if you want to hear.
Thank you. And can you tell us how we could access that video?
Yeah, I'll get with Commander Corman, and we can tell you the proper steps to go to kind of apply for it, but we got it categorized, and I've got the number for you. So you can simply go in and see, you see how the conversation was framed. I've got a couple of my guys that were awesome down there with them. They know pretty much, them over the months and months of work, what we've done there. So you get a good chance of seeing the whole interaction. I think it'd give it a lot more context and give the information from them instead of me up here presenting it to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will say I was on a tour at Wharf Park, which was very interesting. And one suggestion was some people are reluctant to leave their homes because they don't want their possessions stolen, and that they felt that cameras might be helpful. That was one that I had heard. Let's see. I've seen some hands go up again. I think we're beginning to repeat. But Councilmember Sledge and then Johnston.
Thank you. My question is sort of geared toward the committee because I don't know what the conversation was, but these eye-in-the-sky cameras are a select number of our parks, and I would say the vast majority, since we've got more than 120 in the system. How were these parks determined to be the ones that needed the cameras?
Thank you. I think someone from Parks could answer the question of how these parks were chosen. Councilmember Director Odom.
Thank you. These were parks where there had been in the past, or there was a consistent concentration of people experiencing homelessness.
So it's a homelessness response. I just want to be clear, everybody. The homelessness response. It's not about security or safety, except for, in the arguments of some of the folks who've spoken, folks who are experiencing homelessness. So I have again, we're talking about context here. Not on this list is the park that experienced vandalism over the weekend that ensured that organization designed to help families escape homelessness could not hold its fundraiser. And yet that park's not on this list. It's not about crime or safety, it's about homelessness. This is what I'm saying. We're not having the full conversation here. We're simply putting a line item in and saying this is what we need. There should be a much more robust conversation about this and what we're trying to intend and solve and come to a conclusion about, just like we talked about with the equipment piece. And for that reason, it needs to be taken out so we have that discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
Councilman Sledge had asked a question earlier about retention and public records requests, and I wanted to see if someone from the administration could speak to that. I don't know if we found out more information about retention, but I was actually interested in public records requests. I know we had found out before that LPR data would have been, and so we took care of that on the state level. So if that's something that needs to happen, great, but it may not be open for public records requests or not. I don't know. Just wanted to see if you could speak to that. Thanks.
The Central Precinct Commander Starling, who I believe may be watching this on television, noted that there is a 30-day strict retention policy. There is also retained by the Metro Police Department an audit and records of all those who request access or obtain access to the video. So those records are maintained as well. We will still follow up with IT to formalize that response, but that was Commander Starling's observation.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
We're belaboring this a lot, so I'll make it short. I do have one question for the officer that talked about the survey. I am curious just whether the people conducting the survey were uniform armed officers or wearing street clothes.
It was just like I am today. That's we used our body cam, so just normal interaction like we do every day out there. So you can see his whole context on the video. Should answer all your questions.
And Sergeant, can you speak more about the quality of life team? That may not be something that all of these council members are familiar with. Begging your pardon.
So let's see, as of July of 2020, we instituted a new form of community engagement. We term our quality of life team downtown. And our unique mission is having officers go out there, and of course everybody knows we can't solve homelessness through just throwing money and arresting people. So we got to try to develop that trust and build rapport between the department and the members down there to find out how the best way that we as police could also kind of augment their pathway to housing and so forth. So we work mostly with the Salvation Army, and I think, I can't remember how many hundreds of people that have been housed successfully through them, but we've been able to, I think it's close to 500 within a year with the effect of Salvation Army and all the other partners that work with us downtown. But mostly we go in there not only to kind of provide a soft police presence to the outreach workers and to also the community itself, but doing that every day with the same type of people, you start to develop that trust. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in weeks or months, but really over the course of, well over a year, many of the people that I work for know everything there is about the people that live in some of the encampments right on the other side of some of these buildings. So that's been our approach, and it's been real successful. Of course, with us being down there with our service providers, it prevents crime, having that soft police presence. In addition, it builds trust between the department, our officers, and the community. We receive information, we share information, and it's just been really successful. So that's pretty much it. But it's.
Yep. I appreciate that, Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks for joining in the question asking there.
My apologies.
Based on what I've heard, let's just spend another $100 million on cameras. Since they're so successful in stopping crime and solving crime, let's just spend $100 million and have a government-owned camera on every single corner in the entire city, and then we should be totally cool. No crime ever again. Bottom line, after belaboring this for a long time, an expanding of 125 government-owned cameras with nobody in the room able to articulate what the IT policy is for $480,000 is not the right thing to do, and we should pass this amendment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Pulley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a number of questions. I think they're all many of them are answered. I just wanted to maybe recap this before we end this discussion, just so I can be clear on the answers. I understand we currently have cameras in a number of parks. Maybe Director Odom, you can confirm this for me. We have cameras currently located in 48 parks throughout the city. Is that right?
Yes, sir. 48 locations.
And how long have we been operating these cameras?
Parks has had cameras for about 20 years.
How long?
About 20 years.
About 20 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we changing any of the policies regarding retention or how we use these cameras with this allocation?
So I would defer to ITS as we have before. So as far as I am aware, the footage is retained on a server at ITS for 30 days.
All right, is that, and maybe the administration can speak to this, but is that a change from what we've been doing over the past 20 years?
Probably not.
I see no as the answer to that. And I know this 2017 bill, which is what we're operating under now, is the authority for how we deal with these kinds of issues. I understand there is a provision that was in that bill, which has been brought up a number of times during our LPR discussion, where if the current request is for technology already being used and doesn't represent more than 50% increase in the current allocation, then really no council approval is needed. So that's my understanding. Is that your understanding, Ms. Eitland?
Yes, correct. The council does not have to approve the use of the surveillance technology if it's already in use by the entity and it represents not more than a 50% increase in the total number of devices.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. That concludes my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion. This is important. Councilmember Vircher.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I was back here. Never mind, that's not important. After all these amendments are taken out of this resolution, what's actually left? What's left? What's the monetary amount, and what is it that we will actually be voting on?
Ms. Eitland?
Right. If all amendments were added, the appropriation would drop to zero. So.
Thank you so much. I thought my math was right.
Any other questions on this amendment? If not, are we prepared to vote? We'll need a show of hands. All those in favor of the amendment, which takes away $480,000 for cameras. Have I described that correctly? All in favor, please raise your hand high and give me time to count. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Those opposed? 3, 4. Okay. Okay, we are not recommending approval on this one. 3 in favor, 4 against. Several not voting. Next is Amendment 3. Councilmember Welsh, do you want to offer this amendment? Let me give you power.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to offer this amendment for committee consideration.
Can you, is there a second? Can we have a brief explanation?
Yes, I bring this amendment because for several reasons. First of all, I think that morally, this is wrong. Because
Excuse me, can you describe what this does? Because there are people watching who don't know.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. This would remove the $850,000 appropriation to renovate Brookmead Park. And I believe that this amendment is basically predicated on the removal of human beings who have no place else to go from the park, from the grass to the concrete, and I think that that is very cruel. Practically, I think that this is wrong because money from the ARP is really first and foremost intended to combat the negative economic effects of the pandemic and the people who have suffered, not people who have been inconvenienced, which is what I think that this money is going for, people who have been inconvenienced. Because of the economic hardship of the pandemic, homelessness has in fact increased. And those who are suffering the most are the unhoused, not the unable to hike. There are many parks in our city, we all know, that need TLC, and I'm not quite sure why this park is jumping to the head of the line. Until we have housing, which is the solution to homelessness, I think it's really unconscionable to be spending ARP money on anything that doesn't move us toward that goal. And finally, just to reiterate, this resolution is in fact based on the clearing out of a homeless encampment and renovating a park. Council has never before been asked to allocate money and approve the removal of homeless encampments, and I don't believe that we should be starting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you again for recognizing me. So I think, again, there's just, and I understand it because in the title of the resolution, I totally get why we're having this conversation. I just want to make it clear, and I think Director Odom can speak to this as well. This renovation was not going to happen until the homeless encampment there was addressed, not forcibly. We have people in there every day from Salvation Army with the mobile navigation units that are working with folks. We did not meet our goal of a 25% reduction by a certain date, but there has been positive movement there as far as housing some of the folks that are there. I think we have roughly 70 there right now, down from 80. So we're moving in the right direction. Like I said before, I had called Director Odom to make sure that we were not going to be spending money to renovate a park when we still have the issue. This is not going to speed up the solution for homelessness. This is not going to be the solution for homelessness. Nobody's going through and forcibly removing anyone. And that has been, no one, even with the group, the Reclaim Brookmead Park that has been working so hard, they all want for this to be dealt with in a very humanitarian way. So the renovation for the park is needed. It's in disrepair. There's a lot of things that have not been taken care of for a long time. So there's renovations for parks that we need all over the county, but this one in particular for sure. It will not happen. It's not, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make it very clear that when we had this discussion at the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee, this was not about addressing homelessness. This was about renovating the park once there was people not living there. And so it was asked earlier today, well, if you're not going to renovate the park now, and who knows how long it's going to take to get housing for these folks, why do you need the allocation now? Well, as we know, getting money for anything is very, very difficult. It can't come out of operating. This is a capital improvement, so you're looking at a CSP. Those don't come out on any regular basis. And so we have the money now. It is a very appropriate allocation from ARP funds. And so I would say I would rather go ahead and secure that funding now than have to worry about it later. And when that later is, I don't know. And Director Odom, well, with your permission, if she would want it to speak to the timing or what this is about, I just want to make sure that everyone understands. Thank you.
Director Odom.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I do not have a timeline of when all of the unhoused at Brookmead Park will be housed, but I can certainly assure you that the Parks Department has no intention of attempting to renovate the park until there are no people living there. It would be futile. In the past several years, our maintenance team and Parks Police, in coordination with Metro Police and Homeless Impact, have cleaned it up a number of times. But because there is no permanent solution, residents come back. And so, again, it would be futile to renovate the park until our homeless issue is resolved.
Luck with that. Thank you. Councilmember Glover and then Sledge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who to ask this question of. Do we have an idea? How long is this money, quote, available?
As I believe that's Ms. Wiggins.
So we have until 12/31/24 to obligate all $260 million. The final spend can actually happen until 12/31/26, as long as it's been obligated by 2024.
So you did 12/31/24. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good question. Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you, Chair. And to add on to Councilmember Glover's line of questioning, I'm pretty agnostic on this piece because I think I agree with Councilmember Johnson. It needs to be done. Again, I question if we're being told we're not going to do any of this until the homelessness encampment and issues surrounding there at that park are done, that there is no timeline for that currently. I wish, I just put it that way, I wish that this had been part, again, of a overall comprehensive parks maintenance and approval, because what it will look like if we support this for something that is needed, what it will look like is we are doing this in response specifically to homeless. And so again, I guess some of my comments are just addressed to the committee, the ARP committee, not specifically to members here, but just overall, is that as y'all are thinking about these buckets, please think about them in those overall umbrella terms, because I think this council agreed through its votes previously that there was a lot within addressing homelessness and homeless individuals that was appropriate to put under that umbrella. And I think the overarching conversation we're having today is that this one missed the mark. So again, I don't really care that much about this amendment, because I do agree that these things are needed, but we've just been told that there's no sense of urgency because there's so many steps that have to happen first. And we know, hopefully, that a parks-related legislation expenditure is coming. And I just wonder if we could have had a better conversation about Brookmead Park in the context of parks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this amendment? Seeing none, I think we are ready to vote. All in favor of Amendment 3, which removes $850,000 for the renovation of Brookmead Park. All in favor say aye. Raise your hand, please. All opposed? 1, 2, 3. You get 3? Okay. All right, we do not recommend approval. I see 0 in favor, 3 against. Several not voting. Good discussion. Is Councilmember Rosenberg here? He is not. So we will pass on that late filed resolution at this point. That's an important discussion to have, and I appreciate the officers for being here and for everyone asking good questions. We need to vote on the bill as amended, and let me review, thank you, which ones we have. Correct, Amendment 1 was the one that was recommended. That's the heavy equipment. So all of those, is there a motion on the bill as amended? Second? Did I hear a mumbled second? Okay, all right, it's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Glover, do you wish to speak on the bill as amended?
Thank you, Chair. I think the administration answered the question. We don't have to take action on this right now. And I think given that the Vice Mayor is going to hold meetings on the 30th and November 30th and December 1st, I don't know that I necessarily would say you defer for one meeting or two meetings, but I do think it would be proper to defer this. So I'll say that we defer for until the December 6th meeting, because by that point we should have had some input, we should have some data, and we should have something that comes out of the 30th and the first meeting. I think it would be appropriate to do that at this point. I'm sorry. The 7th. Okay, sorry about that. The 7th. I was like, 7 meetings? Okay. Sure, why not? We can do that.
So we have a motion for a one meeting deferral to December 7th.
One meeting deferral, yes.
Okay, is that a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on a one meeting deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor, ready to vote on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, one meeting deferral is recommended. Defer one meeting. Thank you. We'll say that was 9-0. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, good discussion. Next is RS 2021-1233, sponsors Allen, Evans, Suara, Welsh, and Stiles. Approves a coronavirus emergency supplemental grant from the Tennessee Department of Finance and Administration to the Davidson County Juvenile Court to purchase personal protective equipment to minimize exposure to hazards in the workplace. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I see someone pumping their fist in the back. Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you for being here, Judge Callaway. All right, you recommend approval, 9 in favor, 0 against. All right, keep those kids safe. Next is RS 2021-1234, sponsors. Have I forgotten anything? Oh, okay, so this is RS 1221, 1234, sponsors Withers, Allen, and Lee, and Councilmember Withers not here. So I will move to withdraw. Okay, we're going to defer one meeting because technically this should be a bill instead of a resolution because of its nature. So we will defer one meeting and fix that. Yes, let's vote. All in, did I have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We recommend deferral. Next is RS 2021-1235, sponsors Allen and Evans, authorizes the Metro government to join the state of Tennessee and other, whoops, that's on consent, excuse me. Thank you. Next is RS 2021-1236, sponsors Young, O'Connell, Allen, and Henderson. This recommends implementation of certain transportation safety system safety policies in furtherance of Vision Zero. Do you have a motion? Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? We recommend. 9 in favor, 0 against. Excuse me just a second. Okay. Next is RS 2021-1237, sponsors Parker, Withers, Allen, and Young. This approves an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and Metro government for right-of-way acquisition. I have a letter from the sponsor to approve. It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Mendez, I'll recognize you, and then I would like to ask the Planning Department to give us some explanation. But first, Councilmember Mendez.
Well, I'm going to move to defer it one meeting, but I guess I'll see the presentation first.
Thank you. Since they've arrived, if you would be willing to let us do that. And, okay, it's up on the screen. Director. I think your microphone should be live. There you go. Is this the...
Okay.
Director Kemp, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Chairwoman?
If you hold it up good and close.
Oh, okay. So, Chairwoman, members of council, thank you so much for this opportunity to address the East Bank study process and some important next steps where we need your help. In April, we launched our public engagement process for the East Bank study, and as you can see on the screen, since that time, we've held 18 public meetings, in person and virtual, with more than 700 participants, launched 3 surveys with more than 1,500 responses, and much of that discussion has been around what the community desires to see in this area. And I've heard 2 primary pieces of feedback from the community. One, they want a safer and more complete mobility network that provides opportunities for lots of different users to access the East Bank. And 2, a greater diversity of uses, including housing, mixed use, and the like. And I'm really excited by the exceptional opportunity that we have in this city to deliver on some of those community goals. Go ahead. The East Bank study area is roughly 338 acres, with 127 being asphalt parking lots. There's very limited connected street grid, and much of the East Bank area today is zoned for higher density, and to the north, development is getting underway with River North. And if you just look at this screen here today, you can see a deeply disjointed street network, and so it's not surprising that many members of the community have said, we'd like bus service, we'd like bike service, we'd like sidewalks, and it's very difficult to imagine delivering on that vision with the type of street network that we have there today. In July, we released a concept that would establish a primary north-south boulevard. Oh, you can't see it. There's a large pink, sort of boulevard that's shown there. And actually, it's okay that it's faded a little bit, because what I would say is it's not intended to demonstrate a design. The thickness of the boulevard is not intended to suggest a specific width or placement, But generally, from a planning and technical perspective, this is where we think north-south connectivity would be most appropriate, because it connects left is to your north to the River North area, where that project is already required to improve Cowan, to provide bike access, sidewalks, and the like. And so this merely extends that improved network to the south. And so this concept has been presented at a dozen meetings with multiple newsletters, and was the centerpiece of a multimodal study and survey that we conducted to get community feedback. And so there's been quite a bit of community discussion around what a north-south route might look like. There's a particular area that is deeply constrained. Much of the East Bank is constrained, but there's a study area within that is deeply constrained. You see 2 TDOT bridges, as well as the CSX line, the interstate to the north, and the river to the south. And there are also a number of much smaller properties in this area that is a little bit different from the rest of the East Bank, which is characterized by larger properties. And so this is a particularly important area for us to solve if we do want to accomplish some of the community's goals for more equitable access to the East Bank. And so, you know, the partnership proposal in front of you today is a partnership with TDOT, who is offering to assist us in resolving some of these deeply technical issues associated with the study area that you see between the 2 orange lines. On a somewhat personal note or professional note, the resolution before you is one that I sort of see as low risk and high reward, in the sense that by agreeing to this TDOT partnership, we're not committing to spending money today or acquiring specific property this evening, but the agreement provides a match in the event that we do need to acquire property, and it preserves Metro's eligibility for federal and state funding, which we think is really important in this area. So ultimately, Council will decide whether to acquire any property interests necessary to accommodate a multimodal network in this area. That will be your decision, and I will be required to bring to you all of the reasons why that decision is appropriate at that time. Nothing in this agreement today precludes that step from occurring. It just means that if and when that decision is before you, we will have a partner at the state to help us accomplish that goal, and I'm really grateful to TDOT for recognizing the importance here and helping us to solve some of these issues. So with that, Councilwoman, thank you so much for letting me come and give an overview, and I will make sure that my pinks are more calibrated to your visuals next time. So thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilmember Mendez, I think you were, and then Councilmember Glover, and then Councilmember Parker.
So now, thank you to planning for that. I would make a motion to defer for 1 meeting with an explanation.
Been moved and seconded. Your explanation?
All right, so I do appreciate the presentation, and obviously it's fairly unusual to get a planning presentation at a Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I think it's the first one I've gotten in 6 years. And presumably it was decided that was necessary because it's sort of breaking news. You know, there's been a planning process, the East Bank planning study that has gone into great detail, and planning's been doing a great job. And according to the website, it's not over with yet. There's public meetings yet to be announced. The timeline online says November 2021 for that. And while that process is going on, here we have an intergovernmental agreement for spending a total of $50 million, split 50-50 between the city and the state for the north-south connector road. On the substance of it, Mike, I think that's where we should end up. But the planning process isn't done. There's been no announcement before about 6 minutes ago about this. And the fact that it's going to require right-of-way acquisition, there's been no public discussion of that before 6 minutes ago. And so the other piece that I want to mention is that the spending of money, and this is what really has me more animated, the spending of money, when I gave the administration heads up on Friday that, hey, this resolution seems like a weird way to announce a financial commitment to this new road. Don't you want to have some announcement beforehand, heads up? There's going to be some discussion. I'm glad I got taken up on that. But one of the questions I asked was, what's Metro's financial commitment? I got told, half the cost. And then I asked the administration on the phone call on Friday, well, is that in an existing capital spending plan, a current one or a future one? And I was told that it was this one. And that surprised me because you can read all 37 pages of this thing and the 10-page press release that came with it, and there is not any way whatsoever defined $25 million associated with this project anywhere. And given the fact that Mr. Jameson, the mayor, and I were the chief architects last term of making the rules more robust to make sure that projects can get slid into the capital spending plan without transparency to the public, it is disappointing that it took this piece of legislation being filed for me to stumble into finding that there's $25 million in the capital spending plan for this project. If the administration had held off 2 meetings with this resolution, none of us would have known that there's $25 million in the capital spending plan for this project. And that really is not acceptable. I do fundamentally, I'm thrilled to death that the state of Tennessee is interested in helping us with this project, and we need that. We probably need federal funding. Planning has busted their rear ends this entire year to get the planning process to work the right way, so none of my comments are directed in their direction at all. But it's nonsense that the capital spending plan's got the money for this, the $25 million for this in it, and there's no way to figure it out from anybody in the public or the council other than they foolishly filed this thing. And when I asked 10 minutes worth of questions, I found out about it. I think that we should defer this so it matches up with the capital spending plan for the next meeting, because this does, it's an agreement between us and the state for us to spend $25 million. And at our next meeting, we're going to take up a resolution to commit bond funding for that spending. And we should at least consider them together and give the public a chance to absorb that the planning process is moved to the point where we are proposing immediate approval at our next meeting of $25 million for this road that is probably most likely needed on the East Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilmember Sledge.
I'm going to steal Councilmember Pulley's thunder and say if by deferring by 1 meeting, we jeopardize any local, state, or federal funding on this. I guess that's a question for the administration.
That's a good question. Who's going to answer that?
Councilmember, we're not jeopardizing funding per se because the TDOT funding commitment would still remain in place then, but the issue around preserving our establishing the preservation of federal and state funding opportunities and there's a very prescriptive process that has to be in place and be followed for right-of-way acquisition when you're using state and federal funds. And by accepting the funding from the state and putting that grant in place, it puts us under that umbrella of how we're moving forward to even begin to talk about right-of-way activities in this area, and establishing it sooner rather than later is advantageous to us because, and Lucy can certainly comment further to this, because of the tremendous amount of activity that we're already seeing in the area, and being able to better inform those that have interest, property interest and so forth in the area in a way that we can manage effectively is the driver.
Okay, so I guess just a quick follow-up, can it wait 3 weeks? I guess maybe that's the real question.
Lucy, do you want to talk a little bit about the development activity?
So the East...
You recognize.
I'm sorry, Director.
Oh, no,
Go
that's
ahead.
okay.
I apologize.
I don't know the cross rules here. So like much of Nashville, the East Bank is under an enormous amount of development pressure. And one of the things that I have heard from our legal department is that it is important for me not to present very detailed plans showing specifically where acquisition may be necessary without funding in place, because what you're essentially doing is freezing those properties in place. And so that's a legal framework. So the sooner that we can move forward and have the TDOT agreement in place, the sooner we can more specifically work with property owners in detail and talk through some of those technical issues. And so I would just say, Councilman, you know, we can wait 3 weeks. It just means 3 weeks of, you know, not being able to work directly with the owners that we do need to meet with and work through some of the technical and planning issues. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to play
I think
footsie.
it makes sense. I just follow up by saying, can you sensibly go out and have those conversations in those 3 weeks, one of which is a holiday week, when you don't know if this body has approved the local match for it?
So the reason that's very difficult is because, as you know, in this city, in this state, properties can develop under their existing entitlements at any moment. And so Metro has a greater ability to seek improvements that will protect our interest in the mobility space and the sidewalk space, all of those things, if we put the agreement in place, because there's a certain moment at which, you know, we're not able to prevent properties from continuing to move forward. And I think that could be what happens if we continue to wait for 3 weeks or what have you. And I would just reiterate again, this doesn't obligate us to acquire property today or anything of the like. It's just, you know, agreeing with TDOT that they can match funds in the event that we choose to do so.
So help me, and I'm going to preface this by saying I wish I didn't have to care about this road, like, at all. But, like, help me by saying, have those conversations started in advance of this legislation coming forward? Like, have you been having those conversations through these public meetings?
Absolutely. So we have, as I mentioned, we've had 18 public meetings, and then we've also tried to meet with every property owner on the East Bank to talk through technical issues of access, design, what their goals are for today and in the future. So we've absolutely been meeting and talking with property owners. And especially when mobility came up in the public meetings as one of the top sort of central issues, and we knew, looking at the existing network, how poor the mobility is there, we knew that that was going to be something that we would need to tackle with council. So those conversations have been had, but that's different than showing a specific road alignment and showing exactly the property that we need to engage an owner in acquisition. There's two different levels of detail there.
I get it. I think the part that I'm struggling with right now is sort of the hypothetical that a property owner that may or not have engaged in this process previously, that in the next few weeks might decide that they need to go pull their permit immediately for whatever improvement or redevelopment of their property is possible, and we lose that, where they could have at any point, right? Like, in engaging in these meetings, if they came and found, hey, my property is part of this, it just seems to me they would have made a decision before now. Does that sound reasonable?
Well, Councilman, this area, just like Wedgwood, Houston, and other parts of your district, is just under enormous development pressure. And we get phone calls, and I think the council member here whose district this is in can account for this, every day. If there's a rezoning proposal, we can absolutely extend conversations and delay, and I ask the council members' help to try to manage that. If it's an existing entitlement, property owners rightfully expect Metro to follow the process for property acquisition in the event that we have a public need. That's the way we've done it, you know, in this city for decades. And so we need to honor that commitment at Metro and honor these private property interests.
Again, I wish I didn't have to care about this. I think we've put this order all screwy. You know, one way or the other, whether we defer it or not, we got to have a conversation of whether we're even going to put the money in a few weeks. So, you know, I just wish this had been done better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Glover.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to make sure I've heard what I think I've heard, and then I don't know if it's going to be the administration that answers or if it's going to be you from the planning department. because I think a deferral might be the right thing to do if we were actually committing to money. But it sounds to me like we're not committing to money here. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. The agreement before you today is accepting a partnership opportunity with TDOT, where they are offering to ensure that we can protect federal funding down the road if we need it, and they are agreeing to match any funding that this council allocates in the future. So it's simply an agreement with TDOT that we will partner with them, and they are offering to be his hand at the table.
All right, so I'm going to ask the question a little bit differently. We're not committing to the money today. Is this something that would have to be done, or you feel like would be necessary regardless if TDOT was there or was not? Maybe I'm not asking the question properly, but I think you understand the context.
Am I recognized? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm just rolling.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chair.
You're
okay,
good.
yep.
So part of the East Bank planning work has included extensive health, safety, mobility, traffic management investigations. I do think that it is urgently important that we complete a consistent north-south connection in this area to manage growth that is entitled today. And so that's the argument I will bring to council when we come in for the acquisition, so that this body understands the full scope of the need and why it's so important to accomplish this project. One thing I'll say, we've heard from the community extensively that they want housing here. They want a mix of uses. This area, as many of you know, is flood prone. And so it is really important to accomplish a mobility network comprehensively and not let it happen one property at a time, because the mobility network has to be part of the resiliency strategy that we have in a flood-prone area. And I take that really seriously because I do want to respond to the needs of the community, the desire for housing and the like. We just have to look at it more comprehensively.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to switch to the administration, if I may. So, I have a major heartburn on $568 million. I think it's just, I don't think there was enough. And so if the money's in this, as far as the overall capital spending plan, probably going to have a major challenge there. But here we have an opportunity, if I understand correctly, and I'll just go ahead and call it a $50 million project, that for today, we're going to get it for half price. And I don't mean to break it down and sound silly with it, but that in essence is what I think we're talking about. And what was, and I'm going to guess that the motivator here is, this obviously is a very important project to the state of Tennessee, would be my assumption as well. And that's why they're coming to help make this project a reality. I don't know who wants to answer that, but I think.
That's absolutely correct. Is it okay if I respond? No, that's absolutely correct, Councilmember. Everything you've said in terms of both the sharing and the 50-50 participation and all that is correct. The reason that this is so important to the state of Tennessee, to Middle Tennessee, as well as to Metro, of course, is everything that you've just heard Lucy describe about the tremendous economic growth and opportunity that's occurring in that area. The number of trips that all that kind of activity, just the normal growth that's occurring in this area is just incredible. And TDOT fully understands that our interstate system, the interloop, many of these sort of major transportation corridors, that they really need to be a participant in, and that we've really got to manage it in a true partnership where we're making sure everything's working together. And so they're especially committed to the multimodal corridor of this, that it would offer, not just vehicular travel, but transit travel and other modes, so that we really can begin to manage all of that demand that is going to be created by all this enormous opportunity. So they're interested in it as a major transportation provider, from the economic impact, and the understanding of how these kind of partnerships are really necessary in order to move us forward.
Okay, and so I'm going to ask one final question just to make sure that I'm very clear on the money aspect of this. So we're not committing through this to spend any money. We are committing to a basic partnership is what I think we're talking about, a basic partnership with TDOT that we will move forward. And I firmly believe with TDOT in the mix in this, we're going to have a great project. They do great work. And And so therefore, I think that we'll be in good hands from that standpoint if we're not committing the money. So if it allows us to go ahead and start proceeding and having the conversations that needs to be had, then maybe those few weeks would be important, even though it's a holiday. So I probably would not be supportive of deferring this as long as there is absolutely no money that's being committed at this particular time.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Vercher, did you have your hand up? You're recognized, then Councilmember Parker.
I did, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, and thank you, Director, for being here from planning. So there's been 18 community meetings, and part of the justification for this was stated that for conversations to continue. So how were we able to have those initial conversations and we hadn't voted on this yet?
Is it all right if I take that?
Mr. Massimo?
So, Councilmember, the conversations that Lucy was referring to are ones that were held at the planning level and at that master planning level. They were not property-specific conversations or conversations around proposed development, permitting conversations. It was not that level of specificity. We need to be there as soon as we can be because we know that pressure is just sitting there. And we need to be able to deal with it in a more specific way, but we can't, and preserve our eligibility for federal and state aid until we've put agreements like this in place.
Okay, thank you. I anticipated you saying that. Madam Chair, if someone can speak to what is the issue with this tracking with the capital spending plan? Because I was going back through my notes and through my emails, and thank you, Councilman Mendez, because this slipped by me also. There's no communication to this body as it relates to this, and this is how I feel about it. I feel with this coming before we actually vote on the capital spending plan, it kind of forces our hands to vote on the capital spending plan. So what's the issue with this agreement actually tracking with the actual spending for the actual proposal?
I'll say that relates to the deferral. Let me ask either one of you if you can speak to timing of how we move from a partnership to a point where we then begin to need to commit funds.
Yeah, because it's been stated we're not authorizing any spending.
That is correct.
So if we're not authorizing any spending, it shouldn't be any issue for it to track with the capital spending.
I think you're going to get three people to speak on this. This does not commit your spending within the capital spending plan. You could still vote against that within the capital spending plan component itself in 3 weeks. This is essentially forming the partnership with the state of Tennessee. I would, if I could invoke Tom Cross for just a moment to underscore the difficulties we have with respect to, and this is, I think, spelled out in the agreement, but the state of Tennessee makes clear that you cannot essentially send the signal to property owners that they're about to be affected. As bizarre as that may sound, we can't do that, and we can't identify specific parcels. Number one, it affects their legal use. Number two, it affects their willingness to negotiate, as you can imagine. If I could just take a second and ask Mr. Cross, who's been advising Lucy and Faith throughout
Yeah,
this.
but Mike,
Sorry.
we got all that, right?
Okay.
We got all that. The fundamental question is, why can't this track with the capital spending plan? I'm not hearing that answer.
I might refer you back to Mr. Massimo and Lucy.
So what we would lose is the weeks that would be in between that we can go ahead and begin to, under agreement with the state, we would at least be able not to commit funding, but we would be able to start the process so that we could have those protected communications with property owners about values and impacts and technical matters as Lucy describes them and so forth. We can't do that until this is in place.
Thank you. Other
Chair, that we're still not getting there, but I'm not going to belabor it.
I think your question was, is a 3-week deferral problematic? Is that what the question? Okay. And so we've heard some answers on that. Councilmember Parker and then Councilmember Mendez.
Thank you, Chair, for the recognition. Although I'm not a member of this committee, this area in question does largely fall under my district. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to the need for this. I live obviously in the district, and I work in that area. From Cowan Street down through First and Oldham there's really just tremendously limited mobility with the existing infrastructure. It's super duper difficult to envision, the level of growth and contribution to the tax base that we're anticipating there with the existing roadways. So I just wanted to, I know that seems to be something everyone in this room agrees about, but I just wanted to reiterate, if you haven't drove around over there, give it a shot. It's not super easy to get around. In this process, I've been talking with planning, with community members, with property owners. I don't know that we've ever set dates and said, okay, we're going to have the mobility plan done by this date, and then we're going to move on to the next phase. But this has come to be something of a bottleneck in the process. I think we anticipated, I don't know if it's fair to say, Lucy, that we thought this mobility plan would be available to the public. You could go look at it on the website well before this point. So this entire process has been somewhat bottlenecked by the need to get this situated as best we can. And just to confirm, there's a little bit of discussion about what is currently entitled over there, what people could go pull permits for. I mean, there's just in this area alone, there's MUG, MUI. There's already very intense zonings already in place, and we've been super appreciative of all the property owners who are working with planning and us through this process as we get there. And I did want to thank Lucy for being here this evening. To help explain where we are. I did have one question, and this would be probably for the administration. And then if we could come back to me after the question, if that's all right, Chair.
Yes, we can.
Could funds committed to, though not appropriated here, could these funds be utilized to acquire properties outside of the area that is defined in the legislation? So like if we wanted to go into McFerrin Park and say, okay, all of a sudden we need X, Y, and Z parcels, or can you let us know the answer to that?
Not with this particular TDOT contract. It's for a very, it named a specific area. It has a specific scope. And just like any contract, the scope that's committed in that contract, that doesn't mean that there aren't other funds that we could go seek in the future, certainly federal funding opportunities as well. But for this particular contract, what's contained and what you've read in that scope is what applies.
Thank you. And Chair, I would ask, just given the how much this process has been beleaguered by getting this mobility plan out to the public and getting it ready for consumption and availability, I would ask colleagues to vote against the deferral motion and to approve this this evening. I never like to speak against a motion in a committee I'm not a member of, but I would ask colleagues to go ahead and approve this today. It will be coming back to us in a more defined form if any spending actually occurs. And I do anticipate a lot more detail at that level in how it's presented to us. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. I'll keep it brief. I want to, a couple things. One, the $25 million will be in the capital spending plan in 3 weeks. And so funding it is, we're going to be talking about in 3 weeks. Two, this is new information. It's in 6 years in office. It's unprecedented that planning had to make a presentation for a budget and finance thing. That's because this is new information. And letting it sit for one meeting, given the fact that there's new information provided for the first time today, is not unreasonable. And then I want to underscore, in reference to something Council Lady Verger said, it didn't slip by you. You didn't, it wasn't negligence or lack of reading carefully on your part. In all seriousness, there is no way to tell from the capital spending plan legislation, exhibits, or even the 400-page capital improvements budget that this is a project that the city is thinking about at all, full stop. With the Jefferson Street cap, it was possible, if you pulled open the CIB and the CSP on different computer monitors, it was possible to find the Jefferson Street cap $15 million. On this one, literally no way to see this in the capital spending plan. There's no interpretation of this other than it's intentional to, I don't know why, I guess to not let property owners know or to make sure the process goes a certain way. But we have 37 pages of fine details in the CSP. There's 2 projects that aren't defined carefully, the Jefferson Street cap and this one. And it's not too much to ask. If we're going to get a planning presentation, new information for the public, we are going to have the capital spending plan in front of us in 3 weeks. It's not too much to ask to let this delay for 1 meeting and think about it. Let the public know, let the public talk about it. I do appreciate Councilman Parker's comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Glover.
I'm going to come back to you, if I, Chair, with your permission. I'm going to go back to the administration. I think what I heard from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, under state guidelines, under TDOT guidelines, federal guidelines, et cetera, it's impossible for you to go out and have any conversations with property owners until this particular event occurs. We're not spending money, but your hands are tied, planning's hands are tied, everybody's hands are tied here because of regulations from, and regulation may not be the right word, but I'll just say the rules from TDOT and federal. You are at a standstill and not able to move forward to really give us any greater information at this point because our hands are somewhat tied. Is that a fair assessment?
We cannot proceed in the right-of-way process with even the early work that needs to be done until the agreement is in place. That's correct. And a few weeks does make a difference in a very high demand environment like this one for the property owners, most of all, I think. Okay.
I mean, this is a challenge for me because I can't say I disagree with you, Councilman, on the deferral piece. The part that I do disagree with is I think I understand the complexity of this and unfortunately the boundaries in which you guys can operate. And until this component is handled, you really are sitting in the same place, and 3 weeks could make a difference. I mean, I do get that aspect of it. If it was spending money, I would be an absolute, no, we need to track it at the same time. I think because of the complexity of this and the fact that TDOT is wanting to be a partner here, and regardless of how the money comes or where the money's going to come from, we're getting this at and I don't want to sound trivial, but we're getting it at half price, and we're getting a partner that's going to help integrate this thing with interstates and the whole shooting match. So I can't support the deferral because I do believe time is of the essence on this, and I do believe that there probably is information that's coming to us because it was unable to come to us beforehand, if I heard correctly. So, all right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
Just, I guess, a point and then some questions for planning. First of all, the presentation we got today could clearly be out in the public before the legislation's approved, because now it is. So at least that level could have been provided before today. The question, I guess, for planning is, are you all able to have, is the intention over the next 3 weeks to have conversations with specific property owners before the East Bank planning study is over and before there's a public sharing of the drawing of where the road's going to be?
First, thank you, Councilman, for the question. Councilman Mendez, first I want to reassure you that the pink road that was difficult to see has been shared many times publicly. And so the public, I think, has absorbed, and we've gotten feedback on it, that we need to take some important corrective steps to address the mobility network here. If this agreement is put into place tomorrow with a vote, we will feel very comfortable moving forward with more detailed discussions with some of the property owners in the study area, because TDOT will guide us through the process to ensure that we don't take a misstep and do something that precludes our eligibility for federal and local funding. For me, what's important and valuable in this is that TDOT will be a partner in making sure that, first thing, if you look at the agreement they talk about, is the NEPA process. There's a very specific set of steps that we have to take, even when talking about acquisition. And so I would feel much more confident and comfortable over the next 3 weeks having more detailed than master planning level discussions, which have been had, but having more detailed conversations once the agreement is in place. Yes, what we present to the public, and we're really excited and ready to present a concept plan to the public, is going to be more general until we do have some funding and partnerships in place, so that we don't, to the legal department's point of view, we don't impact property owners at a time that's not appropriate. So
what happens if we take the $25 million out of the capital spending program because it's not listed in any CIB budget item anywhere, and or total lack of disclosure from the administration?
Then the TDOT grant, I would look to Faye to confirm, but the TDOT grant sits there. There's no partnership funding, and these properties develop one piece at a time, and there's a limited cohesive vision for how they develop, and the ability to mitigate flood risk and those things through the design of the mobility network will be severely limited.
So you all are going to go forward with the conversations before the capital spending plan passes?
I want to present the master planning level of detail to the community, talk about greenways, sidewalks, bikeways, bulk standards, and the like, but the detail that's necessary for us to address the mobility needs in this particular area is a much fine-grained level of detail. I feel confident that the rest of the properties in this area don't require that same level of work. It's the particular configuration and the particular issues within this, thank you, within this particular part of the East Bank that is so deeply constrained, and it requires a high level of technical sort of analysis to solve the problem. And I think we do need to have a more detailed level of work than master planning. And then once we're prepared to do a presentation on right-of-way acquisition, I'll have to come back to council and say, this is why we've identified this alignment. This is all of the work that's gone into that. And at that point, you'll have a different decision.
So you all, even before the capital spending plan, and with that 25 million that doesn't have a CIB project number, with total lack of disclosure from the administration, you guys are going to go forward with talking to individual property owners over the next few weeks?
No, what I said is, so you've given me a couple of different scenarios. Is the scenario that you approve the TDOT grant, but you don't fund? Tell me the scenario I'm working under, so I give you an accurate answer.
Sure. Yeah, what you just said.
Okay, so you approve the TDOT grant, but you don't approve the 25 million. The TDOT grant sits there. I am obligated to respond to the community and explain comprehensively the vision for the East Bank. I think we would then need to acknowledge that we would be severely constrained on the management of the growth in the area, and we'd have to have a different conversation at that point.
Yeah.
I worry I'm not answering your question.
Yeah, it's a good worry. I'm talking about the 3-week period. If we passed it tomorrow, in the 3-week period, you're going to go talk to individual property owners and saying, your property is subject to, we want your property for a road. You'll do that in the 3 weeks before the capital spending plan?
Sorry, thank you for clarifying. Yes, if you pass this tomorrow, we will get with TDOT. We will come up with the steps that we're allowed to take with respect to engaging specific property owners, ensure we don't do anything to damage our ability to get state and federal funding. And I assume that they will say you can sit down and have more technical and detailed conversations with property owners where we have such deep constraints. And yes, with TDOT's concurrence, I plan to do that.
Well, I'd submit that is not prudent before knowing. Like I'm interested in seeing a CIB project that mentions this road somewhere. Like I'm interested in seeing that before we pass it in the capital spending plan. So far, I haven't seen that.
So I hear you, but there are a lot of ways to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Acquisition is one. We need to be able to have a conversation with property owners about, their individual projects and, sort of what their plans are moving forward. So I'm not going to get out in front of council. I've sat here and committed to all of you that I've got to come out hat in hand and meet the high threshold that I should have to meet to acquire right-of-way and to support funding. I fully expect to have to come back here and make some very hard arguments to this body. So I would not dream of getting out in front of you. I also need to be able to have discussions in a way that won't limit our ability to access federal funding. And unfortunately, the state and the federal government are rigorous partners, and they have a transparent approach, but it's a methodical approach. And so that's...
So as the original game plan on the legislation was to have the capital spending plan and this resolution passed on the same day, right? They were designed to, I see a head shaking behind you from Ms. Milligan.
Oh.
I mean, if we hadn't pushed off the capital spending plan an extra meeting, then the capital spending plan and this one would have been the same day. That was the original plan, obviously. I mean, clearly it was. Anyway, I think they should be deferred to match up. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson, I saw your hand where you were scratching your head. Okay. Several of us have spoken several times now, so Councilmember Glover.
And I keep hearing things, and so, Chair, forgive me, but indulge me if you would, please. So I understand somewhat of the urgency here, and I'll tell you why. Because when I had District 12 on Central Pike, we finally got an agreement between TDOT and Metro. That project still isn't done. I'm not saying that won't be the case here, but it's pretty safe to say these things are very slow in the way they move. Maybe I've missed a point here, but it's not like it's going to come out of the chute tomorrow or Wednesday morning and voila, it's going to happen. So I understand the timing here, because I think one of the greatest regrets I would have is if we did defer it and then all of a sudden you had one piece of this puzzle that fell out of favor on what we'd have to have in this. It could really, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it could muck up this entire project and it could really throw a spoke or it could throw the spoke out of roundness. So that being said, because we're not committing to money, but we are committing to saying, let's start talking about and figuring out how all of this, the puzzle pieces are going to fit together to make this the right kind of picture that's going to make it successful. That, again, is why I can't support it, because this was under the Dean administration on Central Pike, and we still haven't gotten it accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? So we are voting on a motion to defer to December 7th. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of a deferral, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Deferral is not recommended. Is there a second motion? We're back to on the motion to approve then. Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I think we've been pretty thorough. All those in favor of approving, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 2. Thank you. Good discussion. I think citizens know we are working hard to be good stewards of their money. Next is and Director Kempf and Mr. Massimo, thank y'all for being here and helping us understand what's involved here. RS 2021-1238 sponsors Allen approves an amendment to an agreement between Metro Government and Mythics Incorporated to provide Oracle software support and maintenance. Do I have a motion? Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will say I asked IT what was changing, and it is